This is the RPG Crawler, and welcome back to Tabletops and Taverns, the show where I discuss topics of interest to the tabletop role-playing game community. In this episode, I'll go ahead and wrap up my series on Dungeons & Dragons style alignments, with coverage of what can be the most problematic of the alignment groups, evil. I will put links to my general alignments video and my other alignment group videos in the description below. As with the rest of my alignment series, this is going to be about the role-playing of evil alignments and ideas regarding them rather than any specific mechanical builds, and of course it's simply going to be my opinions and thoughts on the matter. It should not be taken as any kind of hard and fast rules, but rather just a series of ideas, as I said, that I hope will be useful to players and DMs alike. In fact, I am hoping that this video is at least as useful to DMs, as in most campaigns the bulk of opponents are likely going to be of evil alignment, and in many campaigns evil is not even allowed. I understand that a lot of DMs in fact will straight up ban playing evil alignments. I know that in some variations of the Dungeons & Dragons game itself, the books themselves come out and say that all evil alignments are for NPCs only. I think that is mostly for PR though, because there's a long history of playing evil alignments in the game. I'm not going to comment. I am going to comment. I'm not going to endorse, nor am I going to condemn allowing evil player characters. I personally allow them in some games and disallow them in others, but ultimately it is up to the DM and the theme of the game they want to run. In my experience, I've found that allowing evil characters in some games actually decreases the number of evil characters that players try to get in under the radar in all the games taken together. It kind of takes the allure of the forbidden out of the idea of playing evil. And people generally find out that there's nothing particularly special about playing evil over any other alignment. They all have their perks and they all have their drawbacks. There's just variations in the characterization that they give to a particular character. There are also a number of DMs who disallow evil because in some sense, whether it's correct or not, they expect an evil character to just bury the needle in the evil spectrum and be completely unmanageable. Both of those are kind of not really 100% true in all cases, but they unfortunately have enough. There are enough instances in both cases that that it makes it a worthwhile worry for many DMs and for many players who think that, hey, I'm never going to be allowed to play an evil character as a result. There are shades of evil which can be perfectly acceptable in all but the most heroic of games. You know, a bastard mercenary that cares about coin over everything, they're not going to have a problem working for the side of good as long as the pay is good. The very nature of evil often pits it against itself, too. So, whereas good characters might be more inclined to cooperate with one another from the get-go, the petty squabbles and maneuverings among evil characters are actually likely to inspire some evil characters to side with good from time to time to oppose other evil that's standing in their way. So if a character or if a player wants to play a Dark Knight, for instance, they might find themselves honor-bound to oppose a particular evil that the DM has set up, whether it be because of family history or some imagined offense, or a budding tyrant or a dark priest might oppose the DM's evil organization because they want to be the ones in power instead. So there are ways, and many of them are actually quite easy, to manipulate an evil character into adventuring peacefully with a good party and doing so without fear of backstabbing because they're united against a common foe. That having been said, if a DM is uncomfortable with handling evil characters in their game, there's nothing wrong with that. Players should respect their DM's wishes in that regard. Absolutely. They should not try to sneak in an evil character under a neutral alignment or anything like that. They should be honest up front, and if the DM doesn't want an evil character in, then don't play an evil character. Going forward, I have formatted this video much the same as I have my other alignment videos, with an explanation of each of the 3 alignments: lawful evil, neutral evil, and chaotic evil. A scattering of examples of character types, and then various vices that lend themselves to that particular alignment. I reiterate, these are just my opinions. They are far from all-inclusive in terms of the particular alignment shades. There are undoubtedly a great many examples of evil out there, so many that it's impossible to list them all. For DMs looking for some inspiration for villains, you can readily apply many of these to characters that you intend to pit against the party, in addition to, players looking for inspiration to play them as characters themselves. I'll probably do a video on constructing memorable villains themselves at some time. I'm not sure when, but do keep an eye on it for it. For this, I've used a couple of sources, including things like Champions of Corruption for the Pathfinder game, and the Book of Vile Darkness for the Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, and I will put links to those in the description below as well. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the evil alignments, I think we should spend just a little bit of time looking at evil itself in general. While there are a number of actions that are clearly and absolutely evil, there's still a lot more that are very subjective and may vary from culture to culture. I want to say desecrating the dead, for instance. It can be considered an absolute evil in many cultures if they believe in some sort of resurrection. But there are reasons why you might want to do so. Not necessarily just to desecrate the dead, but to do an autopsy to find out the cause of death, to investigate a crime, for instance, or to take usable parts to use in transplants in other people. Those are all things that might have they're used for good purposes. So it would vary from culture to culture depending on what's allowed. Generally speaking, however, there are there's many acts which are recognized almost universally as evil. They share a few commonalities. They tend to affect others, i.e. the genuinely evil acts tend to have a victim. They're not victimless crimes. They're not victimless issues. These actions are generally destructive or hurtful, with little to no beneficial effect outside of this harm. Although that sounds simple, it provides a very good rule of thumb for determining whether an act is if an act's in the gray area, you can use those as a general rule of thumb to determine whether it's evil or not. It doesn't help you with how evil it is, though. Does the action have a victim, and is it harmful? If that's all true, then the act is probably evil, especially if the victim has absolutely nothing to warrant that action taken against them. Not every time. There may, of course, be mitigating circumstances, but even in those cases, where, let's say somebody has to choose between killing one person to save a dozen others, if that one person is innocent, it's still an evil act. It's a choice between two evils. You're choosing the lesser of those evils, but it's still an evil act. It's just not as evil as going and, letting 20, 30, 40 people die. There's a lot of balancing there. Of course, it doesn't always have to be gray area. In the D&D game, evil can be a very palpable and a real force. There are demons and devils that embody evil itself, for instance. In such a case, even acts that don't fit the whole there must be a victim and some harm must befall them, Even acts that don't fit that might be considered actively evil in this setting. In the real world, you want to go pray to some sort of evil demon. It may be considered harmless and eccentric because theoretically, no harm can come from it. But in a fantasy world, that demon might actually gain power from such veneration. So the act of praying to a demon might not harm anyone, and it might not effectively have a direct victim. It's still an evil act because the character is augmenting, sometimes drastically, another evil creature's capacity to do harm on their own. Likewise, a cleric that heals an evil character who is actively burying their alignment all the way into the evil thing, with all manner of mayhem, that cleric might be held accountable by their own deity. So that might explain why in earlier editions it was suggested that a cleric might very much want to refrain from healing characters until they had an idea of their alignment, because they could heal. They could go and heal a mass murderer, and then their god could decide to punish them because they healed that murderer, even unknowingly. Guilt by association is a very real thing in the fantasy realm, and can have very real consequences for the characters involved, because a lot of supernatural activity goes on there. But aside from those, for most beings in the D&D world who aren't, inherently evil, like an outsider that represents some sort of evil axis, or who aren't some sort of dark, dark cultist or something, then simply committing one or two evil acts may not necessarily denote an evil alignment. Just like it can be hard to really, top the alignment gauge out amongst the good alignments, it's possible for a neutral, or in some cases even a good character, to commit the occasional minor evil act and not go full on like Darth Vader type. A gambler who occasionally cheats at cards is certainly harming someone, his players, by taking their money. And yet, unless he makes a habit of doing it, he could remain neutral or even good in some instances. It could be argued that they knew the risks going in. As long as he's not like bankrupting people. It's all about the scope, and in some cases mitigating circumstances. A chaotic good thief might steal regularly. As I said before, as long as they didn't make it a regular habit. If chaotic good thief might steal regularly, thus victimizing people, but if they're doing it for a good cause, like if you ever read Order of the Stick, Haley Starshine's motivations in the beginning, or if they're only sticking to evil targets, like the classical Robin Hood thing, where he's, robbing the evil, corrupt rich, which is something that bothers me, but they're robbing people that deserve it, then such a minor evil as the loss of property might not be enough to seriously sway that character's alignment, especially if they go and do good with said property. But hey, you didn't come to watch me talk about good and neutral characters. You didn't come to watch me talk about anything but evil characters, because I've already talked about the neutral and the good in prior videos. No, you're here to get some ideas on evil characters. Characters who've either slipped so far down the alignment scale that they've already made the transition into evil, or perhaps those who started off evil and just went full on board from there. So let's begin. We'll start with lawful evil, also known as that evil alignment that might actually be playable in a heroic setting. Lawful evil characters are those who follow a set of rules. They've got a code of honor, or even they may actually just obey the laws of a general society, but do so in a corrupt way with an eye to exploit that order, that protection that society grants them. They'll exploit that for their own gain, without care over who they harm in doing so, or how bad they harm them, or even perhaps actively using the structure of society to oppress a particular person, family, group, whatever. If law represents the order civilization brings, then lawful evil is that dark underbelly, the manifestation of the corrupting influence of power on an orderly society. a cruel priestess that's got a fawning cult at her back. They may be lawful evil, but so would an ambitious politician. There's somebody like Frank Underwood or something. I haven't spoiler. I haven't watched House of Cards. I've only seen things, but somebody who is willing to do anything to get ahead. They're lawful evil as well in terms of abusing the system. And then there's even perhaps, and it doesn't come up a lot, but a common foot soldier. Not necessarily the one that obeys just because they have to obey, but a common soldier who goes in there and relishes the prospect of unleashing darker tendencies under the cover of warfare. Because they feel they can get away with it, because if they get caught, all they have to say is, "Oh, it was my superior's commands." Some vices which may befit lawful evil characters include tyranny, machination, or plotting of some sort, or in a twisted way, obedience. The dark priestess I mentioned before, she may trade in slaves, she may revel in the power her position gives her over others, acting basically like a tyrant, like a despot, against all of those under her thumb, over her acolytes, over her various hangers-on. A cunning politician, they may seek a high office even at the expense of the very land over which they might rule. They can plot against those currently in power and set up false incidents so they can exploit them to consolidate their own reach. And that is all about the machinations, the plotting and planning, and the intricate web of plots. And for every tyrant, of course, there are many rank-and-file footmen, as I said before, soldiers that would carry out their will. And some of those soldiers might be neutral and just seeking to avoid rocking the boat. Some may be duty-bound, but a very few of them might, as I said, revel in their obedience to a higher power. They may enjoy the release from responsibility that grants them. They could take every liberty they can under the eyes of their commander, inflicting cruelty, despair on civilians, on prisoners, all while secure in the knowledge that they're only following orders. Lawful evil is sometimes considered to be the mildest of the evil alignments, but this is far from the case. After all, it is the alignment of devils, and one would be hard-pressed to call somebody like Asmodeus or Mephistopheles anything but evil. It is, I will grant you this, it is a more subtle evil than the abjectly mercenary nature of neutral evil or the destructive rage of chaotic evil. Capable of carrying out lengthy plans and bound up by its own twisted sense of honor, a lawful evil villain can be really difficult to figure out at first and may go unnoticed until they've already set their tentacles into everything in a particular area. For player characters, a lawful evil character is sometimes easier to justify in a non-evil party, as long as they've got some sort of bond or goal which makes their alliance with the rest of the party, more reasonable, more beneficial to them. They don't mind joining. As such, they are the most commonly accepted evil character type when evil characters are allowed. And in fact, an entire evil adventure path, the way of the wicked, that presumes that the party tends towards lawful evil, just to ensure that they stay together over the long haul. A special note should be made here about the alignment of just evil from D&D 4th edition. There was apparently some difficulty for some people in reconciling the nature of lawful evil, and the thought that yes, a character could be evil while still obeying the law. Thus, 4th edition did away with the idea of lawful evil in terms of the simpler evil alignment, and that comprises a mix of lawful evil and neutral evil, and it was thankfully a short-lived experience. And I think a lot of it is because of the time and place that 4th edition took place, because people forget that there were some pretty evil nations out there, like drastically, openly evil. Like Nazi Germany comes, takes it in, where they've conducted mass genocide. And people forget that if you followed the law, you were bound to do some pretty twisted things. And therefore, this idea that you could follow the law and still be evil was very present in that. And it's still present in societies even to this day. And I think there was this idea that, we should maybe back off on encouraging the view of law and evil. I'm not sure if that's the absolute reasoning behind that change, because I know they made a lot of alignment shifts just so... in 4th edition made several alignment shifts just to avoid some min-maxing in terms of the game itself. But I think that one might have been a PR thing. Next up is neutral evil. Neutral evil is evil untempered by the concerns of law or chaos, and as such it might be considered to be the most pure and destructive of evils by some, but in practice it's rarely the case, at least as portrayed in standard D&D cosmology. True, a small fraction of neutral evil characters are inimical to all life, especially some forms of undead. But most of them are just supremely selfish. Selfish and utterly lacking respect for the well-being of others. I should point that out. A mercenary assassin who takes any job from the highest bidder might be, they're probably neutral evil. As would be a vain noblewoman who seeks only to enjoy herself, no matter the cost to her subjects. In a darker vein, the undead wraith is straight up neutral evil. They care about nothing but the consumption and destruction of life. So neutral evil can share vices with lawful and chaotic characters, but a few are particularly fitting for them. Greed and a desire either for material goods or for knowledge or whatever, especially when no regard is given to how it's acquired, is definitely a neutral evil hallmark. Vanity as an ultimate expression of self-centeredness is definitely exemplary of that whole selfishness that comprises the neutral evil. Whereas unreasoning hatred can represent something similar, except instead of being the product of self-appreciation, it's fueled by contempt, solely by contempt of everyone else. The mercenary assassin is clearly greedy when he kills a target for no other reason than to earn a few coin. The noblewoman, who belittles or abuses her subjects just for fun, may not even recognize their right to exist because she's so wrapped up in her own vanity and her own self. And finally, the wraith's cold, unliving nature is driven by a unique and equal hatred of all living things, because they represent the life it's lost. Neutral evil it's got a huge range of intensity, from the barely evil, cheating merchant to the absolute evil of the wraith, or say a Nikoloth or similar fiend. Like most neutral alignments, neutral evil tends to be easier to play. Let's throw aside the idea that they have to cooperate with a party, but they tend to be easier to play from a characterization standpoint. Where the border between neutral good and true neutral is kind of fuzzy, the border between true neutral and neutral evil is better marked. And it all boils down to this. Is the character willing to harm another person who doesn't deserve it in order to accomplish their goals? If they are, then it's a good chance that they've crossed the line into evil, especially if they actively do it. Although just how far across that line they go may depend on how they harm said person. After lawful evil, neutral evil characters are the second most likely to be accepted as player characters, although it really depends. If their motivation is greed, if they can be bought off, And it's doubtful that they care whether they're working with a good party or an evil one, as long as the money hits their hand and goes into the bank. If their motivation is something like hatred or nihilistic desire to see all things undone, which can be the case in neutral evil, then it's highly unlikely that the character in question will play well with others. Regardless, a neutral evil character's allegiances are prone to shifting, and thus for the long term they may be difficult to trust. Oddly enough, though, neutral evil characters can make brutally effective solo characters, if that's where the campaign goes. You know, if you've only got one DM and one player. Finally, there's chaotic evil. It's the alignment of demons. It's the alignment of bloodthirsty ragers, bandits, and so forth. This is the alignment that encompasses destruction, a place in thought where neither the protection of order nor the kindness of good can provide you any protection. Chaotic evil characters, they're spontaneous, and they're unpredictable, except that someone somewhere is likely to get hurt, and probably sooner rather than later. While chaotic evil characters are capable of long-term planning, it's just as often that those plans might be laid aside by some outburst, whether it's provoked or not. This is the stereotypical alignment for some low-level threats to adventure parties. It's unsympathetic, representing all that most people would strive to avoid in their real life. Some vices that might appeal to a chaotic evil character are rage, decadence, and destruction. Rage is that easily triggered flash of temper in a bloodthirsty soul, but it could also be the burning drive to violence, even in the absence of provocation. Decadence can appear in non-evil characters, but it generally represents what is left after the veneer of civilization begins to crumble away. It leaves naught but a character's base desires and whims, unchecked by the idea that they're answerable to anybody or that society limits them. There's destruction, that is a wish to see everything destroyed, simply put. Similar to the burning hatred of a wraith, but it's even less focused and undirected and tends to meander based on the moment. Destruction might be considered a part of entropy. That's the natural result of the destructive chaos of nature. A dwarven berserker might easily be considered a part of, they may easily be considered that vessel for unchecked rage, especially when in combination of heavy drink and when the bloodlust sets in. That dwarven berserker, they're rage incarnate at that point. A bandit who lives a life of luxury earned on the fruit of his predations, and then between raids drinks himself senseless, they may be considered a example of decadence. They may live in a pleasure palace out in the woods with nothing but shit that they stole and they took from people. And the very last, a demon who wishes to bring about the destruction of the world. That, of course, represents destruction itself, especially when considering the haphazard way that most demonic plots end up going. Chaotic evil is perhaps the least friendly alignment for player characters. It has the hardest time fitting in with the group, even with other chaotic characters. Where I have stated in prior videos that chaotic good is occasionally used as an excuse to play chaotic neutral, and chaotic neutral is sometimes used as an excuse to play chaotic evil. Chaotic evil is almost always just chaotic evil, and is often very chaotic evil. With that said, there have been examples of chaotic evil characters as NPCs that have functioned either with a party or in the service of some sort of heroic end, especially in relation to a quest or a quest locale. Halaster Blackcloak was manipulated into helping Elminster at one point. There are some NPCs in games that are chaotic evil and quite well written, and you could actually see them working with a party. For instance, Korgan from Baldur's Gate 2. That's a finely written dwarven berserker, if I have ever seen one. So it can be done. You can make chaotic evil work with a party. Although it is rare, and chaotic evil is basically the reason why most DMs don't allow evil at all. While I rarely have had to deal with chaotic evil characters in a party myself, even when I open the alignment up to evil characters, I have actually played one. I've played one for quite some time. And I can say that if you just want to let you loose and just cause mayhem, there is no better alignment for doing so. I suppose if your game is a classic murder hobo gathering, with the characters just breaking into dungeons and taking stuff, then a chaotic evil character can do it just as good as any other. So, we've seen the various evil alignments, and some discussion about using chaotic evil characters as PCs, and evil characters as PCs in general. But there's another problem with evil characters, whether of the player or non-player type. And this is almost solely an issue with evil. And that is how other players at your table might feel about certain things the evil characters do. An evil character who robs innocents is very likely, very likely evil. I just said he was evil. A murderer is definitely evil. But there are all manner of really vile and truly despicable acts that human beings have done over history that even players that think they're ready for an evil campaign might balk at. Furthermore, some people might just not be able to handle playing evil, even for something as mild as betrayal or theft. It's just not in their blood to do it. So it's of prime importance that whether you are a DM, either allowing evil or running an evil-focused game, or a player that's looking to play an evil character, that you get a good sense for how comfortable the other players in the group are with the aspects that you think might come up in play. Even something like attacking a child NPC because they were in the way, or killing a horse because it's expedient to do so, can set some groups off. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen with non-evil characters, and that's just the mild stuff. And there are many questionable things that a truly evil character might do. So be right up front with the party when the evil characters are involved, whether you are the DM or the player. Make certain you won't be stepping over anyone's limits. I would go so far as to say that even if the group is totally committed to seeing their evil characters played out, there are some lines that are probably best not crossed. Or if you are going to cross them, just hint at crossing at them. Like in horror games, sometimes leaving the results of some atrocity that this evil character commits, whether it be a PC or, in the case of most games, if it's an NPC doing it, leave a lot of that to the imagination, and it will have more impact sometimes, many times, than if you're specific about it. So yeah, realize that even if you're going full on evil with a campaign, there's some lines you probably don't want to cross there. Well, on that cheery thought, I think I'll wrap up here. Whether or not your DM decides to allow evil characters in the group, just remember, as I said, respect their decision. Don't try to play an evil character under the guise of neutral. It's all about having fun, and if you do that, then the DM may not be having fun, or other people at the table who are expecting to play non-evil characters will not be having fun. This has been the RPG Crawler with Tabletops and Taverns Evil Alignment. As I said, if you're looking for villains, I'll try to get a video on making memorable villains up at a later date. Might be a little while. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you have feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.